Hello everybody, my name is John Mark Johnson Jr. I am the host of Reformed GGA, and today I'm going to be combining a couple of topics. There's a couple of people that I know that are kind of in a quandary about different things, and it turns out that even though their issues are definitely distinct issues, there is a point at which they relate. Let me relate the issues first. As you guys who have followed the channel for a while already know, someone I know owns a Taurus GX4 that hasn't been doing so well. At this particular point, he has already bought a gun that had problems with the trigger not resetting, sent it into Taurus, they supposedly fixed it and they sent it back, and now it fails to reset less, but the problem hasn't been completely taken care of, and he's at a point where he is really, we'll say, disenchanted with the so-called plastic fantastics, the guns that are striker-fired guns that usually have a polymer frame. He has come to kind of distrust the type to a certain extent and isn't a big fan of those guns in general because of the experience that he had with the Taurus GX4. So that's one issue. The other issue is someone that I know who is on the younger side who's looking at getting her first gun ever. She's used other people's guns, she's familiar with guns, she knows how to be safe with guns, at least when she remembers and actually thinks about it. But she knows how to handle guns, but she's never actually owned one herself, and she's considering getting one. And while those are definitely two separate issues, there is a point at which they connect, and to demonstrate the point at which they connect, I want to talk about a gun that I've had in my inventory for quite a while. This is my CZ P10C. C as in Charlie. And this gun has been my winter carry gun for some time now. And I have really grown to like and appreciate and enjoy this gun. This gun, to date, has never malfunctioned for me. And those of you guys who have followed the channel for a while, you know that I have absolutely no problems talking about guns when they malfunction. It's pretty normal on this channel to talk about things that go wrong. Don't really have an issue with that. But like I said, to the best of my recollection, this thing has never malfunctioned. Not even once. Now, it is worth pointing out that I'm usually putting relatively good ammo through this gun. Most of the time it's brass case ammunition. Something that's at least, kind of middle of the road decent, like some of the Winchester loads or some of the SIG loads are pretty good. Even a little bit of Federal has gone through the gun. Very, very little steel case ammo or any of the real low grade brass ammo has gone through this gun. So fairly good ammunition, so that's worth considering in that. And when I shoot it, I usually don't get it super dirty. It's usually no more than about 4 magazines. And by the way, the magazines that I use in this gun are 17-round magazines. So I usually don't put in more than 4 17-round magazines through it at a time. So I never get it super dirty. So that is worth pointing out. Okay, I'm not trying to make it to be something that it isn't, but still it has worked quite well for me. And you guys know that I've had lots of guns that haven't worked quite well for me, and I've managed to break in relatively significant ways. And even this gun itself, even though it's been perfectly reliable, there are some things about it that are not entirely optimal. For example, the grip texture that is on this gun is extremely aggressive, and lots of people don't like it. And in fact, in transitioning back to using this as my winter gun, I kind of had to get reused to the grip because it is a very aggressive grip. And in order to get used to it, you need to train with it and use it fairly often and really practice a nice tight grip on there so you can build up proper calluses and things like that. It is a very aggressive texture, and a lot of people don't like that. That would be a fault of the gun. I personally don't entirely mind it, but it does take some getting used to, and in that sense is not ideal. Also, this gun did not come with an RMR cutout, so the option that I wound up going with, because it was something that I could do myself instead of having someone else do it, was to get a 1913 rail adapter that fit in the dovetail so that I could fit a Holosun with a 1913 adapter to the gun, and that's how I got an optic on it. So it sits pretty high relative to the gun, and you get some interesting bore offset issues because of that. So it's definitely not ideal. But this is a gun that comes from a reputable manufacturer. This, I think, is probably the second or kind of third iteration in the series of guns. They already done the P07 and the P09. Of course, this is the P10 that follows immediately after that. And so this is a gun that has a little bit of a pre-pedigree, if you will. And in fact, it takes the same magazines as the P07 and the P09. It's just striker fired, whereas those ones are hammer fired. But there's a bit of a lineage to this gun, and it was also put out as a competitor to the Glock 19. And frankly, it does just fine as a competitor to the Glock 19. But like I said, it's from a reputable company that had been working on this project for a while, had competition that they were up against that was pretty stiff competition. Glocks are decent guns, and they work quite well, and to compete with that, you need a pretty decent product. So there was good competition there, and frankly, this was not the lowest priced item from CZ that you could buy at the time that would be in this form factor. This is a mildly expensive gun from a good, at least mid-tier, if not high-tier manufacturer, at least depending on what exactly from CZ you're looking at. And the result has been that it functions quite well, especially with good ammo. How does that relate to somebody who is, disenchanted with Plastic Fantastics and somebody who's looking at getting their first gun? Well, my basic point regarding the Plastic Fantastics is that not all Plastic Fantastics are the same. There are companies that have a good reputation for a reason, and that's because they put out relatively high quality work and usually at a reasonable price. And that is the issue with Plastic Fantastics. There are some Plastic Fantastics that are out there that are just absolute junk. Okay, the Taurus GX4 that we're dealing with, at least that particular model that we got, I'm willing to bet that there's more than a few of them out there that are like that, though, just because of the design. It's not a great design, I'm going to say. But at least that particular one is definitely not a good Plastic Fantastic. But like I said, on the other side, I have carried this thing hither and yon with me pretty much everywhere under pretty much any normal condition that I would experience, and it has always worked. So this is obviously a Plastic Fantastic that has a very good track record from a company that has a very good track record, and from a product line that has a very good track record. And it is worth pointing out that the cost of this relative to that Taurus GX4 or any other Plastic Fantastic that is out there that doesn't do so well, there is a noticeable price difference. Now, that doesn't mean that everything that is expensive is great, and it doesn't mean that everything that is inexpensive is terrible. But there is a general truth here. The reason why this gun works so well, and that particular Taurus doesn't, has a lot to do with the quality of the components and the quality of the manufacturing process itself, as well as fundamental design. And fundamental design problems usually go to the expertise, speak to the expertise of the companies that make them. If you want a good Plastic Fantastic, you need a decent company with a decent product line. Decent ammo also doesn't hurt, and all that means you're going to spend more for it. These guns, at the time I actually got this one on a really good sale, it was about $400 when I bought it, but these days it's not uncommon for these things to go over $500, sometimes pretty close to $600, and frankly in this economy they're worth it. Because they work quite well. There's been a lot of testing that has been done on CZ P10s, and they perform very well and stack up against the competition quite well. But they're not cheap. And this goes into the issue of the person that I know who is looking into buying her first firearm. She mentioned that she might be interested in getting, a little 22 because they're cheap to buy. You can get a 22 rifle, under $200 even in today's market. Now, a lot of those ones that would be under $200 are not exactly, the best performers a lot of times, quite frankly. But you can get them relatively cheaply if you want to, and of course the ammo isn't very expensive. But is that going to, and she's also mentioned getting a hunting rifle, one of the hunting rifles that comes with a scope, and there's a few different companies that do that where they have the scope included with the gun at some relatively cheap price, like $350, $450, something like that. And I want this to serve as an illustration relative to those kinds of guns. When you get guns that are at the lower end of the markets, your odds of being super satisfied with them tend to be lower. Like I said, not all cheap guns are necessarily bad, but more often than not, you get what you pay for. This is not a cheap gun, but it works very well. If you go, let's say you do want 22, 22 is a very fine plinking cartridge, and it will work on very small game like rabbits and those kinds of things. It has some utility. If you decide that you want a 22, then it would behoove you to make sure that you get yourself a decent 22. That is, you look for a good company with a good track record, use decent ammo in it, those kinds of things. But you need to think about the quality of the piece. Lots of people get caught up with, being able to get the best possible deal on a gun that they can. And I'm not saying that you need to be a spendthrift. I'm not saying that you need to be loose with your money or imprudent with your money. But you should expect that if you're going to get something that is worthwhile owning, that you're going to have to invest in it. Okay, like I said, not all cheap guns are necessarily bad, but there is usually a correlation between price and what you're willing to invest and what you're going to get out of it. If you're not willing to save up enough money to get a decent gun, then chances are that the gun that you wind up with instead, because you didn't want to wait, or maybe even couldn't, wait to save up your money, the gun that you're going to get, you're probably not going to be very happy with. Buy once, cry once is not a bad phrase. There is some truth in that statement. As Paul would say, the Apostle Paul would say, the saying is true and deserves our full acceptance, that there is great wisdom in buying once, crying once. Invest in your guns. Okay, I understand people wanting cheap guns, and a lot of people are concerned, if something happens or it gets lost or damaged or somehow something, I don't want to have a lot of money in it. I get that reasoning, but at the end of the day, you're talking about a device that for some people could very well save their lives. For people who consistently conceal carry like myself, this could one day save my life. I don't want to cheap out on my life. It's worth getting a decent gun for that purpose. But even if you're not carrying it for self-defense reasons, even if you're carrying it for, say, hunting reasons, you still want a decent piece of equipment, because while it might not be saving your life from some kind of an attack, it will certainly benefit your life to be able to get the prey item that you're going after so that you can feed yourself and your family. Okay, guns need to be thought of as investments. And in American culture these days, we're not used to thinking in terms of items as an investment. Much of our culture is very much so throwaway. And that is a real shame, because you don't really get the full potential that you get out of items when you look at things that way. We want cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, and what we wind up with is stuff that is basically junk and that really isn't designed to last all that long. Even if it works fairly well, it's still not going to last that long. Taurus, just in terms of the components that they use and design and things like that, their guns are simply not designed to last nearly as long as something like a CZ. They're just not designed for that. They're designed to be cheap, relatively easy to use, relatively easy to hit with, relatively comfortable, those things, and to a large extent, there's a lot of products that Taurus has made that meets those goals, but they're not an investment. I would encourage you to basically change your views on guns if you're thinking in terms of the expense being the primary thing to consider. And I get it. I've definitely been in places in my life where I don't have a whole lot of extra money, and with the economy being like it is, pretty much none of us have a whole lot of extra money. I get it. But a lot of the guns that we kind of consider to be boutique, ultra expensive guns, relative to guns in the past that people invested in, the relative proportion is about the same. The high quality guns, they're a lot like the high quality of guns yesteryear, in terms of how much you're going to spend proportionate to your average yearly or monthly income, or however you want to reference it. The high-end stuff really hasn't changed that much, but the market has driven for cheaper and cheaper and cheaper stuff, and that stuff, while it might work pretty well, at least for a time, they're not investments. Okay. A plastic fantastic can be a great investment as long as it's made properly. And the same thing goes with your first gun that you ever buy for yourself. You might not have a whole lot of money to start out with. That's understandable. But whatever you decide to put that money into, make sure that you're getting a decent version of whatever you're getting. So let's say you have $350. Okay, should I put it into this, cheap hunting gun with a really cheap scope on it, or should I put it maybe into a really good .22 instead? You're probably going to be happier with the really good .22 than you are going to be with kind of a rather poor example of a hunting rifle and a rather poor example of a hunting scope. And better yet, if you can manage to save your money and it's not, a pressing issue, save your money and get a real hunting rifle with a real hunting scope. And in terms of cost, I would say that it is safe for people who are getting their first gun to expect to spend at least $1,000 on a handgun. That wouldn't be just the handgun itself. It would be the handgun, the ammunition. If you want to have extra doodads like an optic, you're probably going to wind up spending over $1,000 pretty easily, at least depending on the optic that you pick. But the gun, optic if you so choose, ammunition, a case to put it in, make sure you have it properly secured and locked and those kinds of things. It's very easy to spend $1,000 on a decent handgun, and that's not anywhere near, the Gucci side of things. But $1,000 in a handgun as a system, like I said, all the other things that go along with the gun, is not unreasonable for a handgun. For a rifle, somewhere's, under $2,000 would be perfectly reasonable for a decent gun. It is not uncommon for people to spend $1,000 to $2,000 on a decent rifle, even if it's a decent hunting rifle. You can get some for cheaper, and it's not a bad idea to look at the used market and see if you can find a decent deal there. But at the same time, you need to ask yourself, what you're expecting this gun to do, and if the price that you're paying for it and the care that you're going into choosing it relative to the reputation of the company, where this fits in their product line, etc., you need to be very real with yourself about whether or not you're doing the proper research here and you're actually putting forward the proper investments. Like I said, $1,000 for a handgun and about $2,000 for a good rifle are not at all unreasonable in this market. If you're not willing to put out the good money for it, chances are you're going to be relatively disappointed, we'll say. It always benefits you to really consider those kinds of things. So that would be my opinion on those kinds of things. Yes, it is very aggravating that we have that GX4 from Taurus that we're dealing with that they had a chance to fix and didn't fix. Very frustrating. And, getting your own first gun is definitely an exciting and a cool thing. But I also don't want that particular person to be disappointed in their first gun either. That would really, really, really suck. It's the first gun I got for myself, and it turned out to be a fantastically terrible lemon. That would be really, really, really disappointing. The result in both sides, the lesson to be learned on both ends of this is that if you treat a gun like an investment, put proper research into it, and also be willing to put forward a proper amount of money to get a decent product, you're going to be a lot happier. Cheaping out when it comes to firearms usually does not pay off well. Okay. If you have to, rather than having, 20 guns in the collection, 1 or 2 really nice guns that will get the job done for you no matter what, that are dependable and reliable and are capable of doing all the things that you want them to do, will serve you a lot better. My thoughts, my opinions, and of course that doesn't cover all the issues that the gentleman with the GX4 is dealing with, and it doesn't cover all the issues that the young lady who's considering buying her first gun would have to deal with, but it's an important note. Okay, bargains, they're nice if we can get them, but that is not the proper frame of reference to think of when you're buying a gun. Okay, if you can happen to get the right gun for the right price, fantastic. But you should be more concerned about getting the right gun than the right price. My opinion, it is what it is. All right, thank you guys very much for your time and attention. For those of you who are in Christ, go with God and be blessed. For those of you who are not, I pray that you would come to know him, the true Christ of history, the only genuine Savior of mankind. Amen.